Hi, I'm Stafford Smith. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, USA, where I teach photography at Grand Valley State University. My talk is called Photographers Need Not Apply. Photography doesn't need you anymore. It's a semi-serious, semi-humorous look at photography in the digital age. A new life form. Science fiction writers have long been fascinated with the idea of artificial intelligence and sentient technology. But in these scenarios, humans fare rather badly. Because once computers gain independence from their creators, they quickly realize that the biggest threat to humanity is the human race itself, and the world would be much better off without Homo sapiens mucking things up. From 2001: A Space Odyssey to The Terminator to The Matrix, computers do their best to kill or subdue the offending bipedal hairless apes who somehow hang on through unpredictability and cunning. The good news is we aren't there yet. Siri isn't going to kill you yet. The not so good news is that a venerated medium of visual representation that has contributed more than its share to the changing world has become free of its tether to learned practitioners and has become a self-perpetuating organism. That medium is photography. It has evolved into an organic digital hybrid form, no longer dependent on photographers for its growth or existence. This is not to say that photographs will no longer be taken. They will most likely be taken in ever-increasing numbers, outstripping the staggering volume that we are currently struggling under. But the unpleasant truth is that photographers will no longer be part of the equation. Humans with cameras will continue to take photographs, but they will no more be photographers than any literate person with a pencil and paper can be called a writer. Instead, the term operator is more appropriate. Operators are people who take pictures in accordance with the program of photography. They respond to aberrations in the daily routine by dutifully pointing their camera at them and posting the results to the social media platform du jour. They fulfill social rituals by recording appropriate responses to socially sanctioned events and markers in one's passage of life. They also record violations of the social code and make one's transgressions available for public shaming. Photographers, on the other hand, do not follow social codes or programs when they make images. They understand the communicative powers of the medium by arranging signs and symbols within the frame, manipulating formal qualities for effect, and have developed a certain mastery of their equipment to be able to intentionally create meaning. Operators have existed ever since Kodak introduced the point-and-shoot camera back in 1888. With the tagline, "You press the button, we do the rest." However, operators were kept in check by inferior equipment, a lack of know-how, and most importantly, by not being given access to distribution, by gatekeepers that instead permitted only the dissemination of work by an elite band of anointed photographers through galleries and print publications. The biggest change in photography wrought by the digital age has nothing to do with the camera itself or the plasticity of image manipulation. It's actually the ease of distribution and the loss of authority of those gatekeepers that are the really important changes. An oft-quoted but uncited statistic states that more pictures are taken today in less than 2 minutes than were taken during the entire 19th century. We have reached the proverbial army of monkeys bashing away on their typewriters, one of which will produce a Shakespeare sonnet completely by chance. With billions of smartphone users blissfully tapping away, that's going to be the visual equivalent of a sonnet every few minutes. The lack of expertise necessary to use these high quality and highly sophisticated image making and sharing devices creates the illusion of adequacy and a deluge of images that are all essentially the same, recreating an earlier derivative image that the operator has already seen. Selfies, cute pets, and people filtered to the point of unrecognizability fill the dataverse in a self-perpetuating spiral. The lack of thought and the lack of effort negates individuality and visual contributions that can be attributed to a single person. We are faced with behavior of a lower order. Behavior that is essentially a response to stimuli, not very different from reacting to something hot or cold. In this, the operator is similar to a plant turning its leaves to face the sun, or perhaps if-then statements in lines of computer code. The paradox of having a smartphone is that it feels like empowerment, and in some ways it is, but it simultaneously leads us into mindless, time-wasting behavior that nullifies the individual that we are led to believe we have become through its purchase. Part of this blindness is due to the cult of individuality that is actively promoted in Western countries, especially the United States. It denigrates our strong conformist tendencies and tries to separate us from animals such as sheep, ants, and cows, which we look down upon for their lack of uniqueness. But what many of us mistake for originality is actually a kind of conformity in which we all express ourselves by choosing from a menu of limited options. The photographer, with a deeper understanding of the camera and the power of the image to manipulate viewers' understandings and interpretations of events, retains a higher degree of independence and control over his or her tool. The operator, on the other hand, with less understanding and greater reliance on pre-formatted choices, is more prone to be the manipulated side in the relationship. This has profound implications when one considers how social media not only encourages image creation, but also influences it with a system of rewards in the form of iconographic validations. Just how many images are created for the satisfaction of a virtual pat on the back is unknown, but it certainly compromises the operator's use of camera and distribution media as tools of empowerment. As one flies into almost any American city today, the extent of the suburban sprawl of our car culture is hard to miss. From the vantage point of several thousand feet, the curlicue layouts of housing developments begin to look like the trails of parasites in tree bark. The identical homes surrounding their cul-de-sacs evokes the panopticon prison design, and snarls of highway traffic actually resembles ants streaming in and out of an anthill. Yet, it is with promises of freedom and independence that cars and houses are sold to consumers. And so it is with smartphones and social media. Operators may think of themselves as individuals, but as they upload and share photos, like their friends' posts, and unknowingly feed the databases of security agencies and data miners, they become part of a much larger entity. Like a soldier with a gun that sacrifices his or her individuality to become part of an army, operators, unknowingly through participation in social media, each become a single pixel in an enormous cyborg camera, networked through social media into a giant inside-out eyeball, a 7,000 megapixel camera, seeing and recording everything on Earth. This sheath of surveillance replaces the eye in the sky of the omniscient God concept. There is no need for someone or something to be actively watching us when we willingly report on ourselves. Our technology has tapped into our latent narcissistic desire for attention while we go about our business largely unaware. According to Sigmund Freud, we enjoy a healthy period of narcissism as infants, during which our every demand, every need is met by all-powerful fathers and mothers who dote upon, nurture, and protect us. While we eventually grow out of this phase on our journey towards independence, we never forget it. Freud postulated that we even create gods and goddesses to fill the emotional void left by infantile perceptions of our parents. Social media easily steps in and assuages our narcissistic tendencies through round-the-clock attention and affirmation of simple accomplishments such as reposting someone else's cat video. Yet this stroking of our ego through likes and smiley faces comes at a price. Attention from so-called friends and family also means surveillance by unknown entities with less than altruistic intents. This is a new generation of surveillance that differentiates itself from Foucault's panopticon model in that it is not the fear of a guard's gaze that prevents bad behavior, but a mask of friends and family that actually encourages it. Deeper penetration into the mindset of an individual allows for a more profitable form of control through the offering of desirable commodities tailored to each person's self-declared interests. Chapter 2. The photographers. It used to be that we relied on photographers to record historical events, wars, fashion shows, humanitarian crises, propaganda, natural disasters, and transgressions of justice. Matthew Brady, the great impresario of photographing the American Civil War, brought 3D carnage to stereoscopes in drawing rooms across the country. Jacob Riis showed us how the other half lives in the slums of New York, and Robert Capa got more than close enough on the beaches of Normandy in World War II. But with the spread of operators to every inch of the planet with enough high-quality equipment, a shift has been underway for several years, from professionals to the monkey with a typewriter approach, to fulfill diverse organizations' and consumers' visual needs. In 2013, for example, the Chicago Sun-Times suddenly laid off its entire staff of 28 full-time photographers and started training reporters in iPhone basics. Vogue magazine recently advocated not hiring a photographer at all for a contemporary wedding, and I quote, "It made sense back in the olden days, pre-Facebook albums and Instagram hashtags, when the whole world didn't have phones with cameras on them. Having the actual leather-bound album on your coffee table seemed like the only evidence that the whole thing actually took place. If social media is not your thing, why not scatter some disposable cameras around the party and let your drunken guests go to town? You'll end up with hilarious and candid pictures without the pressure of likes." When was the last great photograph taken by a photographer? Was it Steve McCurry's Afghan Girl from 1984? Or Jeff Widener's Tank Man in Tiananmen Square in 1989? There are no definitive shots of the September 11 attack on the World Trade Center because, well, simply there were just too many people photographing it. The hooded Iraqi prisoner standing on a box with electrodes tied to his hands was taken by one of his torturers. Does the picture taker's collusion in acts of torture disqualify them as a photographer? Does that person not get their name in bold in photo history textbooks? Is there no gallery show? If we label them as an operator, a monkey who got lucky, then we can duck this question entirely. Many of the most powerful images of police brutality were taken by people who just happened to be there at the right moment. These unprofessional images have given rise to the Black Lives Matter movement and the "if I was gunned down" hashtag on Twitter. Much of the damning imagery from the assault on our nation's capital was taken by the insurrectionists who proudly posted them to social media. Far beyond generating a stunning but well-composed image that can win a Pulitzer Prize, these photographs are transforming conversations on race relations, reshaping law enforcement, and altering the political landscape. Chapter 3, The Blob. Cells removed from the human body can be kept alive for decades in special solutions and bred until they far exceed in mass the original life form from which they came. The most famous example of this is the HeLa cell line taken from a tumor growing in a woman named Henrietta Lacks, who died in 1951. Apart from the fact that these cells have been used in groundbreaking research from the polio vaccine to AIDS treatments, it has been estimated that altogether, all the cells grown from the original sample over the last 7 decades would far exceed the weight and volume of the original Mrs. Lacks. In fact, all those cells, they would be enough to cover the earth twice over. This sounds like the stuff of science fiction, and in fact, it's not far from the truth. Stories of mad scientists breeding cell tissue into ravenous monsters can be traced back to 1922 when Alessandro Fabri wrote a terrifying tale about cell tissue taken from a chicken being grown into a rooster large enough to cross the Atlantic in a single stride, threatening everything in its path. Horror comics from the 1950s abound with similar tales of cell culture research going awry, megalomaniacal eggheads throwing sweet young things into oversized, quivering, pulsating pink mounds of jello. And finally, in 1958, Hollywood entered the fray with its iconic movie, The Blob, about a massive alien cell tissue that grows, devouring everything in its path. Operators have traditionally been like cultures of cells politely living in their petri dish-like environs, such as photo albums and slide carousels. But the digital age with the connectivity of social media has allowed for the spread of uncontrolled growth of their images. Even the term viral acknowledges the rapidity and randomness of its reach. It has overwhelmed the gatekeepers and can cross oceans with the blink of an eye. Like the HeLa cells, photography no longer needs its original source. It is in a nutrient-laden medium that sustains its indefinite existence. Is photography a virus? Has it become a cancer? Perhaps what is more important to consider is that, like these cells growing in culture, sent from lab to lab to be used in diverse experiments, is that the product of the billions of operators is being harvested, gleaned, and repurposed by editors, news agencies, artists, and data miners as if it were raw material free for the taking. Postmodern artist Richard Prince, who came into notoriety in the 1980s by photographing Marlboro advertisements, is now printing screenshots of other people's Instagram posts and selling them from upwards of $90,000 a piece. We live in an age when the most influential photographer alive might actually be Kim Kardashian, who is redefining the very concept of shame itself. Instead of training photographers, perhaps what we need to be doing is nurturing a new generation of harvesters, curators, and photo archaeologists to dig up the work of previously unknown photographers, like that Chicago nanny, Vivian Maier. Taking a picture today is no longer a privileged or anonymous act. What we are slow to pick up on is that pictures are a kind of data about us that travels with every image. The entire meaning of the portrait has changed invisibly in front of us, like some sort of sleight of hand. A portrait no longer is just a visual record of what one looked like at a point in time. It is a complex data file. A portrait no longer has to be just visual information. It can be about search histories, shopping habits, medical concerns, secrets you'd probably want to keep to yourself. Data portraits look into our past and can make reliable predictions about our future. They exist in 4 or maybe even 5 dimensions, yet we can still only conceptualize them in just 2 or 3. Each posting or search then becomes a self-portrait in the sense that it alerts interested parties of our whereabouts, our tastes, activities, and desires. We have a perfect blending of narcissism and surveillance. We live our lives craving the attention that we once had as infants without realizing that the gaze we are under is not the benevolent one of our mother. Our brains have not yet caught up with the latest technological advancements in surveillance and still lag behind in the analog embrace of the 20th century. The question on many people's minds then must be, well, what are photographers to do? If they aren't needed, should they just hang up their DSLRs and fade away? No. I have some good news. We are in the second phase of the digital revolution. The first, with the plasticity of image manipulation, relieved photography of the burden of telling the truth. The second relieves photographers from all responsibility whatsoever. We are unnecessary, irrelevant, and useless. And you know what? That potentially makes us artists. Since the days of Alfred Stieglitz and the photo secession, the dream of being taken seriously as artists has vexed photographers. Through contortions and backbends, draconian parameters, mind-breaking French philosophy, wannabe artist photographers have striven to somehow separate themselves for being mistaken for photojournalists, commercial sellouts, and worst of all, amateurs. But no matter how far they stretch for this holy grail, in the back of their minds nagged this thought, I could still shoot a wedding. Finally, though, as the last utility of our craft drains away, photographers can now join the ranks of printmakers, sketchers, sculptors, and yes, even painters, all practitioners of obsolete technology. The blessing of the digital age is that at last, photographers can be starving artists too. Thank you.